Hello and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So today I'm going to continue on with these Distress Embossing Glazes. I have already done 3 tags showing you some different techniques you can use for these glazes, but I'm going to continue on showing you some different ways that you can use these products. So to start with, I am going to attach this piece of paper to this tag. It's going to have to dry for a little bit, so I am going to start by adhering this and we'll come back to it. This is PPA matte adhesive from US ArtQuest, and it's actually fantastic. There's a lady here in Calgary from Paper Pastimes, and she knows the best products to use on things. So she was the one who recommended this particular glue to me. It dries clear, it's really fantastic to use, and I would really highly suggest getting some when you're using it on your projects. I find it so versatile that I couldn't imagine not having it in my stash of things that I use on projects. So I am going to make sure that's lined up nicely. I'm going to let that dry, and then once it's dry, I'm going to cut off those corners so that we can continue adding some glaze to this particular tag. So to start with, I am going to use a Ranger Archival ink and this stamp, which is actually a big maidenhair fern from fredbmullet.com. It's an older stamp. I have a bunch of older stamps in my collection that I've been pulling out lately to use on projects. And I'm going to stamp this one twice on this tag. Stamped once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some Copic markers. I happen to have some on hand, so I'm going to use them for this project. I'm using BG72, BG71, and probably BG10 is my plan. And coloring these in first, just so that when I start adding the embossing powder, it doesn't necessarily cover up or resist the ink. So often when I'm playing with projects, I am trying to figure out how to add things above and below the embossing ink to try to get some really interesting texture. I think these products can be used in multiple ways, so I'm trying to take full advantage of the properties, and I think it's really important to test out your products to really understand what they can do. And when you understand what they can do well, then you can start applying them in a lot more interesting ways, just because you understand what they can and cannot do, where your limits are. And I actually haven't watched a lot of the other Tim Holtz live demos or anything that he's done over the last week or so, just because I don't want to have other people's impressions on the products to be in my mind when I'm doing these videos. I want to try to come up with what I think I can do with them, and then once I've kind of run through my own ideas, then I want to see what the actual creators of the products do. I did actually originally see him do these demos for this product at the Creativation 2020. Someone had posted a video of it, and that's what actually interested me in the product in the first place. And I think it's a really great product. I think it has a lot of potential and a lot of different things that you can do with it that kind of fall outside what I would consider normal everyday use. Okay, that color is not really working for me, so I'm going to try B00. And again, you don't have to always stick with Copics. There's lots of different markers that you can use for doing this. I just happen to have some Copics on hand and I don't pull them out very often, so I thought I would use them for this. So the next thing I'm actually going to do is I want to color in this one, but I'm going to do it different. I'm going to actually use the embossing glazes to color these in. Because I have the brush embossing pen, I am actually just going to color in with that. So I put this back in my box, and I'm using the peeled paint on this part of the tag. So you notice I'm only actually doing part of the image. And this is the beauty of those embossing pens, is you don't have to color an entire image. You don't have to have everything be the same color. You can have a lot of variety to this, and I think that's the beauty of these pens. Okay, so I've colored in half the leaves, and now I'm going to add the rest of the leaves. And you'll notice that I haven't done a perfect job with my coloring, but honestly, I only care so much. I find with a lot of these projects, by the time you actually get all your layers on, slight imperfections are not that noticeable. And to be honest, I am learning to paint looser. I am learning to do things looser, and so I'm learning not to focus on the mistakes as much as going like, well, you know, it gives it a bit of a looser look. It gives it a slightly different look. See, this leaf I missed altogether. So this one's only going to end up being one color. And that's okay. And now I'm going to add some of the cracked pistachio. So now you get the really nice dual tone on those leaves. And again, because they are with embossing ink, they will resist any other inks or anything else that you put on it. So it really does add some more interesting dimension, and you don't have to only stick to one color when you're doing this. So next I want to use my new bubble stencil, which I love. I keep using it on projects. I know I should probably mix things up a bit, but I think every time I have a new product, I tend to use them to death because they're fun. So I'm going to use, again, that very gentle swirling motion. Okay, so you can see here that the embossing powder has now melded in with the embossing powder I put on the bottom image, but it's actually over top of the other image, adding some more interesting texture. So again, like, you don't necessarily have to do everything underneath it or above it. You can actually have a combination of both. So again, depending on what you're looking to do, you can end up with this really interesting variety of techniques. So I'm going to actually finish this one off by adding in some additional colors. And you'll notice that the top image, because of the fact that it is not embossed, does not resist the ink. The actual colors adjust as I add the ink onto it. Well, in here you'll notice that it actually doesn't affect the color at all. It actually stays the same. So something to think about when you're actually adding these colors. Again, my green is going now more blue and more purple, but that's okay. I don't mind the variety in this particular one. And then you can see here that again it's resisting. So this is the beauty of these inks, is that you end up with some really interesting results because of the fact that it does resist the ink that's being put on top of it. And again, that gives a little bit of a different feel to it. And you can see it's also changed the color of the weathered wood on weathered wood embossing powder on that surface. So now what I'm going to do is go in with a baby wipe and just very gently try to add the color back in. And add the glossiness back in on those leaves. And again, if you wanted some of this background embossing to be a bit more muted, you also don't have to take the baby wipe and remove everything. So for this next take, I'm going to use the same image and stamp it again. So I started by stamping the image. Now I'm going to actually add some ink through the stencil. In this case, I am not using embossing ink. I'm just going to use straight ink just to add some interest to this. In this case, I'm sticking to mostly oxides for this project. I've also done this before with just the regular Distress inks. You really don't have to use the oxides. I'm just enjoying the colors that I'm getting from it, and I'm preferring the slightly more opaque result from them. So it really depends on what you're looking to do and what you're trying to accomplish and what you like. There you go. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to actually just add a little bit of softening around these bottom edges here. So I like trying to make some of my art feel a little bit more grounded. It's easy for it to seem like you have images floating, and sometimes you don't care, but I actually kind of like feeling like they're in context to something. I'm just going to make sure this is a little bit dry by just throwing my embossing gun over the top of it, just to make sure that it's dried completely before I start adding the embossing powders. Well, and this is where I'm going to use my little pouch again that I showed you last time, just to go over it, just to make sure that it is fully dry before I start adding additional layers. So I'm going to do something similar to what I did in the last tag, which is add in some embossing of a couple different colors. This will look a little bit different though, because if you remember last time, we actually did the semi-transparent embossing powder first, which again gives it a more pure color. In this case, we're actually mixing it with the colors in behind. So the question is how does that vary and how does that look differently? And that's something you can really use on your projects, of understanding how much this affects by having a base color underneath it, and how much that affects how the final result will work out. Because the embossing powder is semi-transparent, you can actually see some of the little bubbles coming through there. So again, something to think about when you're doing this is, do you want extra texture? Do you want less texture? How do you want this to actually look on your project? And what I like about a lot of this stuff is it's quite subtle. And so now we're going to use some cracked pistachio. And now what I'm going to do is I want to accentuate a few of these circles. So because we have these really nice embossing pens, it allows us to pull out certain features that we would like in our stencil that we can accentuate in our art here. So I am actually using the bullet pen. Let's make sure to line that up nicely. I'm going around them, but I'm also trying to add some shading in, like that you would see if light was coming in from this direction. So I've been better with a brush pen. It depends on what your control's like and how well you can handle your brush pen. I find that my ability to deal with a brush pen is sometimes good, sometimes also great. So sometimes I actually rely on the bullet one just so that I can control it a little bit better. In this case, I kind of want to go subtle with it. So instead of using like a really brilliant color, I'm going to use weathered wood. Weathered wood, again, because it's that very light color, I think it's going to add interest without being a little overwhelming. So as you can see, yeah, that's a little bit more subtle than using a completely different color. So that blue being a little bit more subtle adds more like a shading look to it. You could do this on any sort of stencil where you could actually end up having lines where you have one line that's darker, one light that's shiny, one light that's lighter, one light that's shiny. Like you could do some really different things with this. So I just really wanted to give you a proof of concept of the idea that there's lots of ways you can use this in a way that's going to be really interesting for your art. So here are the 2 tags that we've done so far. The 3rd tag I'm actually going to put in a separate video, so please look for part 2 of this video for the final tag. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, click the notification button, and like this video if you found this useful. You can also check out my website, www.hopalongstudio.com, for more creative inspiration. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you next time.